Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today, and welcome to our partner briefing on the Lung Association's new report, Zeroing In on Healthy Air, on the benefits of a nationwide transition to zero-emission vehicles and electricity. I'm going to kick it off to our opening speaker in just a moment, but before I do, I want to make 3 quick remarks about reminders. 1, this webinar is being recorded. 2, this webinar is closed press. And 3, throughout the webinar, please put your questions into the Q&A box. We won't use the chat function today. We'll use the Q&A box, and then we will have a portion for question and answers at the end. So without further ado, I will kick us off by introducing the Chief Mission Officer of the American Lung Association, Deb Brown, to give some opening remarks. Go ahead, Deb.
Hi, and thank you, Laura Kate. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us to discuss the American Lung Association's new report, Zeroing In on Healthy Air, which shows a critical opportunity for improving public health across the nation through a transition to zero-emission vehicles and electricity. I want to start by saying how much we appreciate the partnership of everyone on the line. We truly value working with all of you to advance our shared goals of clean air, a safe climate, and a healthy, equitable future for all. With today's webinar, we want to make sure this report is as useful to you as possible and that it can be a resource now and moving forward. But before we get started, just another quick reminder that the webinar is closed press. If you're a member of the media on the line looking to cover our report, please leave this call and email media@lung.org, and we will be in touch to schedule an interview. All of us know that while climate change might have once seemed like a future threat, tragedies like the catastrophic wildfires and powerful hurricanes are just 2 of the many examples of how climate change harms our health today. On top of that, according to the American Lung Association's State of the Air report, more than 4 in 10 Americans are currently living in places with unhealthy levels of air pollution, and climate change is making air pollution even harder to clean up. The transportation sector is a leading contributor to both air pollution and climate change. Too many communities across the U.S. live with high levels of dangerous pollution from vehicles on nearby highways and trucking corridors, ports, warehouses, and other pollution hotspots. Thankfully, the nation has the technology and systems in place to make dramatic reductions in harmful pollution from the transportation sector, as well as from the electricity sector. Our new report, Zeroing In on Healthy Air, takes a deeper look at this shift to zero-emission technology and the many benefits it would create. Zero-emission technologies are a win-win for public health. A widespread transition to electric vehicles running on clean electricity would save lives, prevent asthma attacks, and result in over $1 trillion in public health benefits. The American Lung Association has a long history of advocating for healthy air for all communities, especially those who bear disproportionate harm from pollution. We believe that everyone, regardless of their zip code, deserves to breathe clean air where they work, live, learn, and play. In a moment, you'll hear from several of my colleagues, who I hope that you will help me congratulate and celebrate as we share this new report with you. Speaking today will be William Barrett, National Senior Director for Clean Air Advocacy at the Lung Association and a lead author of the report. He will highlight the report's findings. Laura Kate Bender, National Assistant Vice President of Healthy Air at the Lung Association, who will discuss the policy efforts needed to make the benefits in this report a reality. And Diana Van Vliet, National Director of Outreach and Engagement for the Lung Association's Healthy Air campaign, who will share some ways to engage around the report. And then finally, we will leave some time for questions and answers, and we will look forward to that discussion. So thank you, and it is now my pleasure to turn the call over to William Barrett to share more about the report's findings. Will?
Thanks, Deb. I appreciate it. Thanks for the opening introduction and kind words. Very happy to be able to share this report with everyone today, and really hope that you'll find it useful in some of your own advocacy efforts around the country. And without a lot of background, I'll just say that this report really builds off of a 2020 report that we did called The Road to Clean Air. And we made some significant updates to from that past report. And in this report, we updated our assumptions. The modeling tools that we used have been updated. And then the way we present the data has been updated. So rather than in our past report, a single year of benefits, we took a cumulative approach to the benefits. So we're reporting on 2020 to 2050 in terms of the public health benefits that we're showing. So I wanted to just kind of walk through some of the assumptions that we used, some of the methodology, and then basically jump right into the key findings. And again, really hope that this is useful to everyone in the advocacy space for clean air and climate change. And again, note that this report is really looking at the cumulative public health benefits from a transition to zero-emission transportation, as well as non-combustion renewable energy in the coming decades. So on this slide, you see the key assumptions we use, basically looking at transition to 100% zero-emission vehicle sales, passenger vehicles by 2035, and the entirety of the medium and heavy-duty truck sector moving to zero-emission new vehicles by 2040. And that includes school buses, transit buses, and then the medium and heavy-duty vehicle fleet. 100% sales no later than 2045. We also look at a non-combustion electricity grid by 2035. This is kind of inspired by President Biden's call for a decarbonized grid, but we've really adjusted that to non-combustion. We want to make sure we're not burning anything, so we really wanted to target that as one of our key assumptions. So again, a wide-scale transition to new vehicle sales in the 2035 to 2040 timeframe, and then being zero, and then 100% non-combustion electricity grid across the country by 2035. And here, just to kind of highlight the main tools and models we used in this assessment, I mentioned the prior report that we did. We had, during that process, a lot of the tools were being updated. So US EPA, Department of Energy, they were updating the models that were kind of the foundation of this analysis. So we used the most recent available models for fleets, looking at the US EPA MOVES model, for upstream emissions, the Department of Energy, Argonne National Lab GREET model. And then our consultant ICF utilized their own grid modeling tool to help shape the non-combustion grid that we wanted to see modeled. That's their IPM model. And that helped us kind of look at what the shape of the grid could be if we wanted to eliminate combustion. Essentially, we took the upstream and downstream, so tailpipes, power plants, refining, all of those emissions, and ran them through the US EPA's most up-to-date COBRA model, which provides county by county level results based on changes in emissions. And just to note here, Alaska and Hawaii are not included in that model, so they're not included in our report. But basically, what we did was took a look at the business as usual, kind of a straight run of the tools for the fleet. So basically, US EPA, just their straight MOVES model, business as usual. And then we looked at the power grid based largely on the work we did in our 2020 report, largely based on Bloomberg New Energy Outlook, and compared the emissions outputs from that US EPA baseline model run and that baseline of the Bloomberg New Energy Finance grid emissions. And then that generated the results that we're going to talk about now. So basically, here you see the results of this increasing zero-emission cars, school buses, transit buses, and heavy-duty vehicles, coupled with this non-combustion electricity grid. We find this staggering number of $1.2 trillion in public health benefits. This is a national number. This is cumulative to 2050. So basically, 2020 to 2050, $1.2 trillion in cumulative public health benefits. That's 110,000 premature deaths avoided, so 110,000 lives saved, nearly 3 million asthma attacks avoided, and 13 million plus lost workdays avoided because the air is going to be cleaner, because we're making this shift to zero-emission light duty and heavy duty vehicles and a non-combustion power system. The report also has, in addition to the national results, we have state-by-state information, basically, again, on a cumulative basis. Here you see the 10 states with the highest public health benefits ranked by monetized benefits that we get out of the COBRA model. And you see, a couple of states, California and Texas, with over 100 billion in cumulative health benefits, and then a whole long list of states with over, tens of billions of dollars in public health benefits over this cumulative period. So all of this table of state results is available in our report, as well as state-by-state fact sheets where you can find this information. In addition, we have metro area results that show, at a much more local level, the benefits. Here you see a snippet of the top 10. In the report, we have the top 25 cities listed in terms of potential public health benefits to be had through this transition. And on our webpage, we actually have a map that you can click over and find 10 more cities on the map. So there's a wide geographic spread, but essentially, we hope that you'll be able to find your local results and use them in your own advocacy. So again, major results at the local level, really pointing to the need for this transition in every corner of the United States. On the transportation side, really want to just emphasize that we're talking about both passenger vehicles, the light duty fleet, and the heavy duty fleet. We see major reductions in smog-forming NOx emissions, particle emissions, and greenhouse gases. Over 90% reductions in the on-road fleet of NOx, of greenhouse gases. The reductions in particle pollution are significantly reduced, but not quite to the level, because we're also factoring in tire wear and brake wear. We know that zero-emission vehicles, electric vehicles, are going to have regenerative braking with benefits on the brake wear side, but still we do account for those impacts of tire and brake wear. So that's why those fine particle numbers are not as great as the other two pollutants shown here. Again, here, wanted to really emphasize that from a public health perspective, we need to get zero-emission trucks on the road as quickly as possible. We need, that sector generates a tremendous amount of pollution that impacts health at the local level. It's a very small share of the overall on-road fleet, but generates over half of the emission of NOx, of particle pollution. And by cleaning up the heavy-duty fleet, again, just want to emphasize, we really get to the heart of cleaning up air pollution, cleaning up local diesel exhaust, and addressing disparities that are often caused by heavy-duty trucking corridors near ports, warehouses, major freeways, and other diesel hotspots. On the passenger side, we know that the greenhouse gas benefits are significant, and actually about 2-to-1 ratio over the heavy-duty sector when we look at our report. So again, on the passenger vehicle fleet, we see a significant reduction in greenhouse gases, along with those 90% reductions in NOx. But when we look at the share, the passenger vehicle fleet generates about twice the benefit for greenhouse gases than the heavy-duty sector. The heavy-duty sector generates about 8 or 9 times the benefit of the light-duty sector in terms of smog-forming NOx emissions. So just wanted to, again, really put a fine point on the fact that we need the whole transportation system to move forward. In this study, we're really looking at the on-road sector, but all corners of the on-road transportation sector. Here, really wanted to show this slide as kind of framing up some of the results I'll talk about in a minute. Our 2021 State of the Air report, that's our annual report card on air quality across the United States. We found that over 4 in 10 Americans live in a community impacted by either ozone or particle pollution. We know that that is about 135 million Americans, but we also know that there are significant disparities in who's most impacted by pollution in the United States today. Here you see a person of color in the United States is over 3 times more likely than a white person in the United States to live in a county that receives failing grades in every category in our annual State of the Air report. So ozone pollution, daily particle pollution, and annual levels of particle pollution. There are significant challenges, significant disparities, and really one that we wanted to try to bring into this report, because we know that some of the the greatest sources of pollution disparity are in the transportation sector and in the power sector. And the transportation sector meaning refining, oil and gas operations, everything up the chain. So in this study, we decided to try to answer this question: who would benefit through this transition? And when we looked at it, we said, okay, let's look at, we have county by county information. We were able to generate, demographic information, or pull demographic information for each county, and basically say, okay, we have the 100 counties in the United States with the highest percentage population of people of color. So those 100 counties, that's about 3% of all counties in the US. generating about 13% of the benefits. So we know that we could actually see concentrated benefits in these counties with higher levels of or populations of people of color. And that came out to about $155 billion in those 13% of all counties. Now, it doesn't mean that we're looking at this at a census tract level or zip code level or neighborhood level. These are county level, they're broad, they're not guaranteeing that the benefits are really targeted in those most impacted communities, communities of color or low income communities. But I think it helps tell the story that we're speaking to. We need our policies, we need our investments designed to really address equity concerns and disparities in exposures to harmful air pollution. And this transition to zero emission has to really accommodate every community, especially those communities who have been disadvantaged for so long and marginalized by policies and investments that haven't served their needs. On this slide, wanted to really highlight too, the global climate health benefits or global climate benefits of this transition to zero emission transportation. This is basically $1.7 trillion in global climate benefits due to major reductions in greenhouse gases in the on-road fleet. This is cumulative to 2050 based on the social cost of carbon analysis based on the US government estimates at this point. So again, major climate pollution reductions, 24 billion metric tons avoided. Again, this is limited to the transportation sector. It doesn't incorporate the entire grid benefits like we do on the health side, just based on the way our modeling worked. But it's really, I think, important to note, as we clean up the fleet, we're also, we're addressing health concerns. We're also addressing climate concerns, and I think they go hand in hand, and that's really what we want to try to emphasize here. And ultimately, climate change is first and foremost, in our opinion, a public health crisis, and one that makes air pollution worse and makes cleaning up air pollution more difficult. So really want to place a strong emphasis on the climate front as well. Here, we just put these in for this presentation. These charts don't appear in the documents that are out in public, but really wanted to kind of highlight that on a state-by-state level, we have a lot of information that we hope can be helpful. And I'm just going to click through quickly. All of this information is in the report, but in every region, we see major public health benefits through the transition to zero-emission transportation, as well as the power sector moving forward to zero-emission non-combustion resources. And so, again, we hope that you can find information on your region in the report, in the materials. There's, the state-by-state fact sheets, as well as the report that lists out some of those major metropolitan areas. And we're certainly all happy to chat with folks if there are more detailed questions as well. So I think I will get to my last slide and really just highlight, again, some of the resources that we have available. Our study, the Zeroing In on Healthy Air report, is available on our website, lung.org/EV. We have a lot of press materials that have gone out. We have our fact sheets. And then on the website, there's also a petition to the Biden administration that you'll hear about a little bit more to help basically move these potential benefits off the pages of our report and into communities around the country. And then the last thing is we have our technical documentation from ICF, who is our consultant to this project, so you can kind of see more detailed step-by-step approaches that we took throughout the project. And again, there's a lot of information in there that we'd be happy to discuss with you going forward. So with that, I want to introduce Laura Kate Bender again, have her come back and share some of our policy recommendations, and then I'll look forward to getting back to the Q&A. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Bill. Really appreciate it. And thank you again to you all for being on the line. My name is Laura Kate Bender. I'm the National Assistant Vice President for Healthy Air at the American Lung Association. And I'll walk through the policy recommendations section of this report. First, just to recap, as Will noted, the report is built out on the assumption that we get to 100% sales of new light-duty vehicles by 2035, 100% sales of new heavy-duty vehicles by 2040, and that we get to a 100% non-combustion electricity grid by 2035. And those are, as Will said, in keeping with some of the ambitions of what the Biden administration has put out. So our policy recommendations in the report there are many. They cover the federal, state, and local levels, and I'll dive into a few of the key ones here today. So at the federal government level, of course, we want to see successful implementation of the investments in the bipartisan infrastructure bill that can help drive this transition. And we know that Congress needs to take additional actions. We didn't advocate for a specific piece of legislation in this report, but we did note the need for dramatically expanded investments on both the vehicles and energy side. We called on the federal government to convert their fleets to zero-emission vehicles as quickly as possible. And then I want to dive in on a few of our recommendations to EPA specifically, because these recommendations are partially about investing in availability and incentives and infrastructure around zero-emission vehicles and transportation, but then also about stronger standards that drive down emissions levels that go hand in hand with those incentives. So first, EPA needs to review and update the national ambient air quality standards in line with the science. These standards show the public what level of dangerous air pollution is safe to breathe and drives cleanup to that point. And as you probably know, they cover 6 of the major outdoor air pollutants, including ozone and particle pollution, which are currently under review by EPA now. We need EPA to act to update these standards, but then also to review all of the national ambient air quality standards to ensure that the levels set are protective, that they match what the science says is safe to breathe, and that they're implemented and enforced, because cleaning up sources of pollution like transportation and energy to get to these levels of air pollution that can finally be healthier for people to breathe, that's going to be a really critical lever for driving this transition to zero emission nationwide. And then there are current actions I wanted to highlight on the cleaner cars and cleaner trucks. So first, right now, like in the next day or two, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration is going to finalize stronger CAFE standards, so fuel efficiency standards for light duty vehicles. This goes hand in hand with an action that EPA finalized a couple months ago to set stronger greenhouse gas standards for the next few years of our cars. This is a critical step. We'll certainly applaud it when we see it, but we need them to immediately pivot to the next step, which is setting much stronger greenhouse gas limits on pollution from vehicles for beyond the year 2026 to really drive that transition nationwide on the passenger car side. EPA is also taking action on trucks. So they have a current proposal to strengthen the nitrogen oxide emissions limits for the next several years of heavy duty vehicles, as well as strengthen some of the greenhouse gas standards, but really this is more about nitrogen oxides. Public comments on that rule are open. And so I invite you to get in touch with us afterward if you are interested in commenting or interested in attending or speaking at EPA's virtual public hearing. We are happy to provide resources for that because we're urging EPA to make that rule as strong as possible, maximize the health benefits. And then again, they need to pivot to the next round of standards that will make the next set of years of trucks much cleaner to drive that transition to zero emission. Also want to highlight Justice 40. The Biden administration has pledged that 40% of investments in this transition will go to underserved communities. And we really see that as a floor to reduce the health problems that come from air pollution from vehicles and from our current energy mix. We really need to target the communities that are experiencing the brunt of the pollution. And so our recommendations also include calls at every level to ensure environmental justice. And then finally, of course, the federal government needs to continue accelerating the transition away from burning fossil fuels, biomass trash, whatever it may be for electricity generation, and switching to clean, renewable, non-combustion sources. At the state level, again, this is a big list. There's a selection in the report, but the core I want to highlight is the ability of states to opt into California's stronger standards. Under the Clean Air Act, California has the ability to set stronger than federal emission standards for vehicles, and California does have strong standards in place to drive the transition to zero emission light and heavy duty vehicles. States have the ability to opt into these standards. Many have done so, and in fact, there's actually a chart in the report if you download it at lung.org/EV that shows which states have opted into which standards. So we're calling on all states to opt into these stronger standards to ensure that they can drive this transition. There are additional actions states can take, such as converting their own public fleets. And then I also want to highlight preemption. The Lung Association has long opposed laws at the state level that would prevent local governments from taking health protective measures. We have seen a suite of proposals across the country in many states that seek to prevent localities from, for example, building out EV infrastructure or requiring it, setting more protective building codes. We strongly oppose preemption of local communities' ability to set more health protective measures, and that certainly extends to the transition to zero emission vehicles and electricity. And then finally, on local governments, there's two key points here I want to highlight. Again, we call on local governments to shift their public fleets, to collaborate, to build out infrastructure. I think this is a great point to highlight the environmental justice imperative of this local work. Obviously, cleaner cars, electric vehicles dominate the conversation around zero emission transportation a lot of the time, but it is far from the whole story. It's really by cleaning up heavy duty vehicles that the communities who live near ports, warehouses, distribution centers are going to see major benefits. And then also, of course, we need to ensure that we're not just targeting people who can afford a new electric vehicle if we're talking about personal transportation. So ensuring that local governments have zero emission transportation options that expand beyond, EV charging infrastructure, such as, car sharing programs, bikes, on-demand access to clean transit, more active transportation options. Those are in there as well. And then finally, I will hand the mic over to my colleague Diana in just a moment and highlight that this report has an associated advocacy action that she will highlight that calls on President Biden to drive the transmission to meet the goals that we've laid out in the report. That is the top level action that we have tied to the report. You can, sign the petition online, but as you can see, there is a suite of action recommendations here. And so number one, know that we are working on these and we are happy to be a partner with you in working on these. But number two, we hope that this report can be useful at every level of government and shared with policymakers at every level. Thank you so much. And with that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Diana Van Vliet, who leads our outreach and engagement for the Lung Association's Healthy Air work.
Thanks so much, Laura Kate. And thanks everyone for joining today. So in talking about opportunities for engagement, I'll just start by saying you're joining today and engaging today. So thank you so much for joining this webinar to learn more about the report. And if you're wondering what else you can do besides joining today to get into the details, good news is we have a lot. So as Laura Kate mentioned, we have this great petition. So on this slide on the right, you'll see the exact petition language to President Biden, which includes calling for investment in zero emission technology so that all new passenger vehicle sales in the US are zero emission by 2035. All new sales of medium and heavy duty trucks are zero emission no later than 2040. And that our national electricity generation shifts to non-combustion sources by 2035. So what we laid out in the report. So please feel free to sign this petition, to circulate this petition to any lists or individuals who might be interested. You can find the petition on the report website at lung.org/EV. The more the merrier, and the more voices we have calling for these, for this action, the better. So beyond the petition, we also have another opportunity tomorrow. We're holding a Twitter storm tomorrow, March 31st from 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern. And the official hashtag for that Twitter storm will be Zero Emission Future. So feel free to retweet the Lung Association during that time or post whatever you'd like, as it relates to the report findings, or the need to transition to zero emission vehicles and electricity. But be sure to use the hashtag Zero Emission Future with any tweets that you post during that time so that we get that hashtag trending and more attention on it. We'll also have sample social media available for the Twitter storm if that makes it easier for you, and we'll be circulating that after this webinar. Lastly, beyond today and the Twitter storm tomorrow, we're hoping that this report is as valuable as possible for as many groups and individuals as possible. We want you to feel free to use the report findings in your work. And we hope that, on the national level, on the state level, on the local level, it is incredibly relevant and valuable. And we want to hear your feedback too. So please let us know how we can help, if there's anything we can do to make the report more accessible. And with that, we will get into the Q&A section. So I will just echo what you see in the Q&A function. We have disabled the chat. But if you can put your questions in the Q&A box, we can go ahead and get started. So I will pull up the Q&A and see what we have. So I will say the first question is from, trying to see the full names, from Dan. I can't read the last name, but do you have a breakdown of the health benefits between the mobile source sector and the power sector? And I will direct that to Will off the bat, but feel free to jump in, others on the line.
Hi, Dan. Thanks for the question. And we have the emissions breakdowns in the technical documentation that's posted on our website, but we did not run separate health analysis models, different COBRA model runs for each of the different sectors. So we have presented the health benefits as a whole for light duty, heavy duty, and the grid, but we don't have it separated out between those three sectors. So the emissions breakdowns are included in the technical documentation, but not separated out by health benefits. Hope that helps.
Thanks so much, Will and Dan. So the next question is from Marissa. Can you talk about the public transit / active transportation recommendations that are outlined in the report? And again, I'll kick that over to Will and maybe Laura Kate.
Sure. I'll just note, we're assuming a full transition to zero-emission transit bus sales in this report. We see that as a critical opportunity to improve health in communities around the country, and especially to really build out transit service in the cleanest, most efficient way possible. I'll ask Laura Kate maybe to talk about the policy recommendations, but just wanted to flag that first.
Yeah, and so in the report itself, we talk about the need for local governments to coordinate locally to ensure, particularly that communities of lower incomes have access to active transportation and other zero-emission mobility options. The Lung Association has a lot on this, so we are happy to follow up with additional information, particularly around smart growth, the need to prioritize access to active transportation and transit. So let us know how we can be a resource there, and we're happy to share more.
Thank you. So another question from Dan. Can you provide more detail on your business as usual baseline against which you measured benefits? I assume benefits would be even larger in comparison. To a baseline of a constant 2021 emissions. Is that correct?
Okay. I'm not sure I understood the last piece of that, but basically the US EPA MOVES model, we ran a straight run of that out to 2050, and that model essentially assumes very low to no penetration of zero emission technologies. And then we compared that for the transportation side to our scenario for these 100% sales of passenger cars in 2035, 100% medium and heavy duty sales no later than 2040, and then basically the delta between the emissions profile of the baseline MOVES run, the US EPA model, and our scenario is what we input into the health benefits analysis, along with the differences between our grid assumptions, which were essentially informed by that Bloomberg New Energy Futures report that we included as kind of our standard in the 2020 report that we did. And then again, compared the emissions profile from that grid mix out to 2050 against our cleaner grid mix that hits non-combustion at 2035. So it's essentially a run of on-road transportation against on-road transportation, and then we also have the grid that is basically in that Bloomberg analysis. We use that because we think it's more realistic than the EEI, the national assumptions about coal. And the Bloomberg piece or scenario basically had coal dropping down significantly over the next couple of decades, and we think that that's more accurate than coal sustaining over the decades. So we tried to get a more realistic view of the grid out to 2050, and then applied that against our non-combustion grid at 2035 and the rollout of that. So I think it's important too to note, we've got the legacy truck fleets, the legacy passenger vehicles are still generating pollution past our 100% sales target. So there's still cleanup work to be done, but the basic idea is, the business as usual case is lack of strong push on zero emissions, relatively lower implementation of renewables compared to our analysis that ramps up both.
Thanks for clarifying that, Will. Another question. Does the report take into account the trend of growing freight traffic for heavy-duty trucks?
Well, we certainly are trying to get to the bottom of it. We're not necessarily, basically the models account for population growth, VMT or vehicle miles traveled growth over the decade. So that's accounted for, the increasing traffic. I can't say that the models pick up the most recent surge in increased trucking with the pandemic and more shipping and that kind of thing. But we do very much want to make the case that the transition to zero emission trucks, especially in communities near ports, warehouses, and other freight hubs, is critical. I mean, we know just how much damage is caused by the goods movement sector, and especially in those communities that are near the major trucking routes and warehouses and coming in and out of the ports, for example. I think that hopefully that helps explain it. But as far as the recent uptick in freight traffic, that isn't necessarily included in the model.
Thank you, and that was a great question. Next question, what's the outlook for the policy priorities the report highlights?
I can start. Welcome, Will, chiming in. So the way I've thought about the targets that we laid out in this report are ambitious but achievable. These are certainly not pie in the sky. They do require action at every level to get there, which is why we have this report to illustrate the benefits of what will happen when we do. I'd say at the federal level, these are all things that, particularly on the federal agency side, that EPA is in process on. I think my big question is, can we get there quickly enough? Some of the initial targets that the Biden administration put out for some of these actions, they're behind on the timeline. There's a lot of work to do, and there's a lot we're asking. Frankly, we're asking for a lot across the vehicles, and the national air standards and cleaning up power plants. But that's because all of it is critical. So I would say, again, ambitious but achievable. And what we need is for as strong a drive from the health community and beyond to illustrate that this is critical for the public.
Thanks, Laura Kate. Anything to add, Will?
No, thanks.
Well, thank you. All right. To a clarification from Dan's earlier question, I assume that even in the business as usual case, there are some emission reductions from current levels due to fleet turnover and coal retirements. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. There are, especially because we used the Bloomberg projection on the grid side, we saw reductions on that side, but also on the fleet turnover side, the natural fleet turnover, and some of the EPA modeling does include some of the standards that were on the books. I can't remember the cutoff date, but so some cleaner vehicle standard turnover to the fleet, but and actually kind of going back to the question of freight impacts and increased trucking, what we see, I think a lot of the times is you'll see an initial kind of decline in emissions, but then population growth and VMT growth kind of counteract that those benefits. And that's why, again, we think that this transition to zero emission is so important, because it kind of helps overcome the population growth, the vehicle miles traveled growth. We know we need to address those, but in a lot of the policies that we look at, we wind up seeing, in the out years that good trend of NOx emissions, for example, going down, starting to turn around as the traffic increases, and certainly that's especially true in the trucking sector. And Dan, I'm more than happy to take more questions now or offline, but you're asking some good ones, so thank you.
Thanks. So what was the most surprising thing found in the report results? And I'll ask Will and also Laura Kate.
I would say probably the most surprising thing is just the magnitude of the benefits that we're talking about. You know, we're looking at over $1 trillion in public health benefits. In our prior report, we were at, you know, in a single year, 70 billion in public health benefits, and that didn't include, you know, the full grid shift and that kind of thing. So the scale of it, I think, is eye-opening, and certainly as we've talked to partners like everyone on the call here, or even reporters, that has really resonated. That, you know, the extreme burdens that, you know, many communities face today due to air pollution, and the fact that, you know, nearly, you know, over 40% of all Americans are dealing with unhealthy levels of air pollution. The flip side of that is, if we can eliminate a good chunk of that pollution, we're talking about tremendous public health benefits. And I think that that's really what resonated with me, is talking about, you know, figures in the trillions of dollars when usually we're talking about state regulations in the tens of billions and that kind of thing. So this is really, the scale of it is most impressive, I think.
Will, you took mine. Yeah, I mean, so all of us on the call know that the benefits of clean air standards and regulations dramatically outweigh the costs. We all know that the health impacts of air pollution problems are incredibly expensive, that it's really cost effective to clean up that source of pollution as opposed to treating the health impacts. But when I heard that the figure was more than $1 trillion, my jaw dropped.
Thank you both. So the report talks about federal, state, and local recommendations on the policy front. Are there recommendations for individuals to help the shift toward zero-emission vehicles and electricity? And Laura Kate, maybe I'll start with you on that one.
Sure, happy to start. So, you know, I work in advocacy, so that is my starting point here, but certainly calling on your members of Congress, your federal representatives and administration officials, your state government, your local government, and really the way that we make this happen is by there being demand from the public. And so, you know, I urge folks not just to take action through the report website, lung.org/EV, but then, you know, use this as it's helpful to advocate at every level and make your voice heard with it. Beyond that, yeah, of course, there are things that you can do to, you know, obviously, if you're considering a new car and you have the ability to purchase an electric vehicle, go for it. But you don't need to have to buy a new car to be able to reduce transportation emission. You can make sure that your current car runs as effectively and efficiently as possible. You can choose active transit or public transportation when you have that available option. And again, you know, you can really help make sure that at the community level, your community is set up in such a way that makes it easier for people to have those options as opposed to needing to drive everywhere. Because ideally, you know, you wouldn't have to need to own a car.
Will, anything else to add on what individuals can do?
I'll just also, as an advocate, I'll just say, you know, I think what Laura Kate said about, you know, using this report to the, you know, to the best end in your local community or state level, I think that's really important, that there should be something in here for everyone to be able to, you know, take into their advocacy work on clean air and climate equity, these issues that we're all working so hard on. I'd also note too that in just foreshadowing, in 3 weeks, we're going to release our annual State of the Air report that also kind of provides the county by county, city by city air pollution burdens across the country. And that data compared, you know, coupled with this data of sort of the challenge and the solution, we think can be a really effective pairing. So just wanted to preview that a little bit and say, again, we've got local information here, state information here that I think, you know, across the board can be very eye-opening to really tell the story that, you know, when we talk about zero-emission vehicles, when we talk about clean energy, we're really talking about public health benefits at the local level, and that's really what we're trying to get to.
Thanks, Will. And I'll just take a moment to say that, as Will mentioned, our annual State of the Air report for this year is coming out specifically on April 21st. So mark your calendars, and we'll actually have another partners briefing on that too. So keep an eye out for an invite for that if you'd like to attend. And another great question, do you have, or do we, the Lung Association, have plans to look at hard to decarbonize transportation sectors such as aviation and shipping? Will, maybe I'll start with you.
Sorry, could you just repeat that? The beginning
Sure.
of the question.
Do we have plans to look at transportation sectors that are especially hard to decarbonize, like aviation and shipping?
Right now, we don't have plans for a report on those. You know, it's always in the mix of what can we do more. But yeah, obviously, I think when we look at the off-road sector, we know that, you know, rail, shipping, aviation, like these are major sources of pollution. Especially, you know, we've been taking a lot of interest in California and our work here on commercial harbor craft and ocean-going vessels, and, you know, cleaning those up because they are just so damaging to portside communities. And we've spent a lot of time on that. Recently just adopted a new rule on that front at the California Air Resources Board just a couple of weeks ago. And, you know, what we want to see too is federal action on, you know, all of these, you know, sources. But we know that, you know, again, as a California-based advocate, that we need real attention to the rail sector and locomotives, and seeing, you know, increased cleanup and, you know, new emissions certification standards for rail as well, including, you know, looking at zero-emission rail. So I think there's a lot of different ways that we can get to it. At this point, we don't necessarily have plans on a report like this on those sectors, but we take that under advisement, I guess. Thanks.
Thanks, Will. So another question, what is different in this report compared to the previous reports on electric vehicles released by the Lung Association?
I can start and then Will can fill in, but you know, I know Will gave some of the overarching methodology at the top, but really one of the big differences is that this is a cumulative total. And this looks at the health benefits from 2020 out through 2050. And that's why we're seeing that, you know, truly impressive benefits number. As Will mentioned, there's also changes to the assumptions, both around, you know, what we'll see without these measures, but then also the measures that we're driving to that we baked in as what the transition could look like. And we have that new information on demographic data that shows that, you know, of those 100 counties with the highest percentages of populations being people of color, you know, there are 3% of counties standing to gain 13% of the benefits. So there's some exciting top lines in this report, also that breakdown of light versus heavy duty that Will showed earlier. And we're happy to dig in more if folks have specific questions around this too, because it, you know, it's in the same vein, but definitely, you know, hard to compare directly because we did change up the methodology quite a bit.
Thanks, Laura Kate. All right, well, with that, that is the remainder of the questions in the Q&A. Last call for Q&A questions. And while we're waiting, I'll just say thank you so much to all of you for joining today. We're really excited about this report, and we hope that it can be useful to all of you. You know, I'll just again reiterate, we have another report coming out, State of the Air, April 21st. So stay tuned for that. As Will mentioned, it's a report card. It gives report card grades for air pollution across the country. So more good stuff to come, but don't want to minimize the report today. And we hope that you're able to join for our Twitter storm happening tomorrow again at 2 p.m. Eastern using the hashtag Zero-Emission Future. And I don't see any more questions in the Q&A. So again, thank you so much for joining today, and we'll be talking on Twitter tomorrow, I hope. All right, have a great rest of your day.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks for all your work for clean air, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.